When bringing out a sequel to a popular game, it's usually best to strike while the iron is hot, while it's still relevant and fans are salivating for more. Franchises such as Assassin's Creed and Call of Duty, for instance, receive regular series updates today. Is that the best approach? Well, maybe and maybe not, but at least fans of those games never have to wait too long for their next fix. However, not all fans are quite that lucky. In fact, some are so massively unlucky that they had to wait more than 2 decades before getting to play another installment in their favourite series. Oh, what's that? The game they enjoyed when they were kids finally got a sequel when they're too busy to play it because they now have kids of their own? Oh, what a treat! For this list then, we've managed to identify 10 games that came out more than 20 years after their predecessors. As we all know, a lot can happen in 20 years. The world can change, empires can crumble, and more worryingly for sequel developers, tastes can shift significantly. With all of that in mind, were any of these games worth the wait? Well, let's find out. I'm TripleJump's in-house Beyond Good and Evil fan, Peter from TripleJump, and here are 10 of the longest gaps between video game sequels. Number 10. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters 1991 and Kid Icarus Uprising 2012. 21 years. Nintendo, who has been known to revisit an IP from time to time, kind of left Kid Icarus behind back in 1991. This NES and Game Boy platformer franchise starred a young angel called Pit, as he explored a world filled with nods to Greek mythology. Despite the games being popular among fans and receiving praise from critics, the series faded into the background as the likes of Mario, Zelda, and Metroid stepped into the limelight. Then, suddenly, Kid Icarus Uprising appeared on the 3DS in 2012, switching up the gameplay and delighting the now elderly fans of Pit the world over. This belated entry in the saga is a third-person shooter in which players take control of Pit in on-foot and airborne levels. Reviews were positive, sales were decent, and Kid Icarus was back on the map. Temporarily, at least. He hasn't gotten another game since then, which means he may qualify for this list again in the future. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Having said all that, Pit wasn't completely inactive for those 21 years that followed of Myths and Monsters. He was playable in 2008's Super Smash Bros. Brawl, and has been a mainstay of that series ever since. You've got some steady work there, at least, kiddo. Just, don't fly too close to the sun. Number 9. Bubsy 3D 1996 and Bubsy the Woolly Strike Back 2017. 21 years. Hailing from a time when seemingly every game company wanted its own sassy animal mascot, Bubsy the Bobcat attempted to dethrone Sonic from his woodland critter with chewed throne. He failed. I mean, of course he failed. Look at him. However, that didn't stop everyone's favourite bob-tailed lynx from repeatedly trying to get a foot in the door of the Gaming Mascot Hall of Fame. Prior to 2017, his most recent attempt was Bubsy 3D, also known as Bubsy is 3D in Fur-Bitten Planet, a title nearly as horrible as the game was. To put it as kindly as possible, Bubsy 3D was a victim of the early days of polygon graphics? Yeah, that's more than fair. Also, it came out the same year as Super Mario 64, which made the already terrible game look like a war crime by comparison. Bubsy explored vast, bland environments as players dealt with needlessly clumsy controls and Bubsy's insufferably grating voice clips. Unsurprisingly, the titular feline went quietly into the sunset, and nobody missed him. Until 2017, that is, when Black Forest Games saw fit to bring the Bobcat back with Bubsy the Woolly Strike Back. This time, Bubsy returned to his 2D platformer roots, while making use of modern advances in technology to present some 3D elements that don't just look like a jumbled mismatch of colourful protractors. This all resulted in a game that, well, still got panned by critics and almost immediately receded into obscurity. But points for staying on brand, I suppose? Number 8. The Great Giana Sisters 1987 and Giana Sisters DS 2009, 22 years. If you're seeing this 1987 platformer for the first time, you'd be forgiven for thinking it looks a tiny bit familiar. The layout of the levels, the placement of enemies, the sibling heroes
or heroines,
and the Italian flavour are all quite reminiscent of something, but I can't quite put my finger on it. Hang on, put a moustache on that little sprite there, editor? Oh, there you go. See, it was subtle before, but the moustache did it for me. Now I get it. To say that the Great Giana Sisters borrowed a few ideas from Super Mario Bros. Is a massive understatement. Nintendo wasn't too pleased, and rumour has it they used their clout to intimidate publishers Rainbow Arts into removing the game from production. As such, copies of the Great Giana Sisters are highly prized in the retro collecting world. It took 22 years for these sisters to come out of hiding, and by that point they'd become brazen enough to show up on Nintendo's own DS. The flippin' cheek of it! Giana Sisters DS performed decently with critics, and even spawned Twisted Dreams, another sequel in 2012. Thanks to their DS revival, the sisters went from being an interesting footnote in Nintendo's history to having some history of their own. Oh, they'll be getting amiibos next, no doubt. What a sorpresa inaspettata that would be. Number 7. Pokemon Snap 1999 and New Pokemon Snap 2021, 22 years. Alright, yes, we know there were Pokemon games between 1999 and 2021. Pokemon Snap, however, is a spin-off that stands so far apart from the established gameplay of the mainline Pokemon games that we feel it's distinct enough. I mean, it's a photograph 'em up, for crying out loud, so just let me have this. Pokemon Snap came out on the Nintendo 64 in 1999, and it allowed you to be escorted around the various biomes of Pokemon Island while taking photos of the critters you saw along the way. Get a shot of a rare Pokemon in its natural habitat, and you'll really impress pocket monster enthusiast Professor Oak, meaning he'll allow you to take more Poke-Snaps in interesting new areas. The surprising release of New Pokemon Snap in 2021 provided shutterbugs with more of the same, but used the features of the Switch to update the experience a bit. That, of course, meant giving players the ability to touch up their photos after taking them, even adding filters and stickers. Maybe they should have called it Pokemon Snapchat. Haha! Is Snapchat still relevant? Maybe we should have worked out an Instagram gag instead. Number 6. Yar's Revenge 1982 and Yar's Return 2005, 23 years. Having absolutely nothing to do with vengeful pirates, the 1982 Atari classic Yar's Revenge instead focuses on a Yar, which is apparently some kind of alien insect. The object of the game is to destroy the Quo tile, and if you want to play on hard mode, you also have to learn how to say it out loud. Jesus Christ. Players can achieve this goal by either making the Yar touch the Quo tile, or by eating a piece of the Quo tile shield in order to activate the Zorlon cannon. Watch out though, because the Zorlon cannon can harm the Yar as well as the Quo tile, but at this point I feel like I'm just saying random words. I'm reading what's written in front of me, but it could all be made up as far as I'm concerned. Look, it's a bit difficult to tell exactly what's going on from our modern perspective, but this was the Atari 2600's best-selling game, so it must have been doing something right, I suppose. Despite this, Yar's Revenge went completely sequel-less until 2005, when Yar's Return was released for the Atari Flashback 2, 23 years after its predecessor. Yar's Return effectively eschews the many gaming advances that had happened since 1982, and instead provides a sequel so true to its roots that it's barely distinguishable from the original. As we know, more up-to-date interpretations of space bugs nibbling on shields tend to look a bit different, but to be fair, I can't imagine this running on a Flashback 2. Number 5. The Legend of Cage 1985 and The Legend of Cage 2 2008, 23 years. Released in 1985, The Legend of Cage allowed players to step into the tabby of an exceedingly agile ninja. Seriously, look how high this guy can jump. Originally an arcade hit, The Legend of Cage received various home conversions and was quite a big deal back in the 1980s. For whatever reason though, Cage went into hiding for the next 23 years, and various other ninjas such as Cage from Virtua Fighter stepped in to take the limelight. In 2008, however, the original Cage stepped out from the shadows with a belated sequel, The Legend of Cage 2, for the Nintendo DS. This new game sported a vivid art style, updated graphics and gameplay, a second playable character, and, among other things, this guy's really disturbing head. Despite super stylish visuals, creepily extended skulls aside of course, and action-packed gameplay, The Legend of Cage 2 received middling reviews and got somewhat lost within the DS's extensive library. As such, the likelihood of a third game seems rather slim. A word I wish I could use to describe this man's weird head. Put it away, I don't want to see any more of it. Number 4, Shaq Fu, 1994, and Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn, 2018. 24 years. To be fair to Shaq Fu, if you were looking for someone to back you up in a fight, you could do worse than 7'1" muscle-bound basketball star Shaquille O'Neal. Having said that, cyborgs, voodoo priestesses, and ancient sorcerers might be just outside his field of expertise, so maybe we could have looked a little further than a basketball pro to save the day. Despite having a fun and zany premise and some decent digitized visuals, the game received a lukewarm reception from critics. Oddly though, Shaq Fu's reputation took a violent nosedive as time went on, and Mr. O'Neal suddenly started to appear on lists of the biggest video game travesties. Honestly, it seems a little bit undeserved if you ask us. There are far worse games out there, and we've played most of them on the channel. Even so, Shaq Fu got a surprise sequel 24 years later. Shaq Fu: A Legend Reborn replaced the original's one-on-one bouts with side-scrolling beat-em-up gameplay. Reviews for this unexpected follow-up, though, were unfortunately generally negative, meaning that Shaquille O'Neal's gaming reputation remains tarnished. Still, I'm sure he's doing okay. Number 3, Wasteland, 1988, and Wasteland 2, 2014. 26 years. Wasteland, released way back in 1988, is a game that will be forever intertwined with the Fallout series. Developed by Interplay, Wasteland proved to be their blueprint for 1997's more famous Fallout. While the 10-year gap between Fallout 2 and Bethesda's Fallout 3 did seem like an extraordinarily long time for fans of the franchise, it pales in comparison to the 26 years that Wasteland purists had to wait. Wasteland 2 finally arrived in 2014 and gave players a drastically needed visual upgrade. However, unlike Fallout 3, the Wasteland sequel stayed largely true to the style of the original, with its top-down perspective and intentionally similar environments. While Wasteland 2 received a positive reception from critics, it never achieved Fallout's fame and success, despite being the franchise that started it all. Still, that didn't stop Wasteland 3 from being developed and receiving similar critical praise in 2020. The Fallout series, on the other hand, well, not so hot at the moment, is it? In fact, you could say, slow and steady wins the waste. Number 2, Battletoads Arcade, 1994, and Battletoads, 2020. 26 years. While British developer Rare's weird obsession with violent, uncouth animals came to a head in 2001 with Conker's Bad Fur Day, they were already well on the way in 1994 with Battletoads Arcade. Featuring more violence than they could get away with on home consoles at the time, not to mention some good old-fashioned toilet humour, this over-the-top side-scrolling brawler still failed to light up the arcade scene and marked the aggressive amphibians' last outing for quite some time. It wasn't until 2020 that Rare saw an opportunity to bring back the Toads on Xbox and PC, sticking to their series roots with a side-scrolling 2D fighting game, complete with controller snapping difficulty. Interestingly, Battletoads actually references the 26-year gap in story, with the titular Toads spending the past 2.5 decades wired into a machine that allowed them to live out their fantasies of fame and fortune. When they're found and removed from the simulation, they find the world has moved on and they're not as famous as they once were. We see what you did there, Rare. Unfortunately, this proved to be a little too close to reality, as Battletoads received decidedly average reviews and didn't stay relevant for too long. I guess this just proves that beat-em-ups are largely a thing of the past, and there's no way that a modern reimagining could ever live up to those nostalgic vibes. Right, what's next? Oh. Okay, Okay, never mind. Number 1, Streets of Rage 3, 1994, and Streets of Rage 4, 2020. 26 years. The third entry into Sega's street brawling franchise didn't live up to the excellent standards set by the first two. With punishing difficulty, disappointing music, and frustrating timed levels, it wasn't exactly gaming perfection. It was still decent, however, and continued the story of everyone's favourite group of vigilante ex-cops, while adding a couple of interesting unlockable characters to the mix. It wasn't perfect, but it certainly shouldn't have been bad enough to kill off one of Sega's most popular franchises of the 90s. Yet somehow, that's exactly what it did. After Mr. X and his crime syndicate were defeated for the third time, the streets of Wood Oak City went very quiet. Despite rumours, leaks, and even videos of a proposed Dreamcast sequel, fans had to wait all the way until 2020. That's when Streets of Rage 4 finally hit the streets of Rage. This overdue fourth entry retained the side-scrolling style of its predecessors, but modernised the graphics and gameplay. Happily, Streets of Rage 4 delighted critics and consumers alike, and frenzied fight fans were able to hit the alleyways and take their rage out on gangs of punks and goons once more. I'd say it was worth the wait, but come on, 26 years? Now I'm really worried about Beyond Good and Evil 2.